Welcome back to Hoochos. That's right, a completely empty greenhouse. Well, maybe not completely empty. So today I want to take you on a walkthrough of some updates on systems that have been featured on the channel, the DIY hardware store propagation shelving and lighting, the citrus hydroponic systems, as well as a ginger and turmeric wick wedge hydroponic system that I've been working on, the dragon fruit, and I'll also be redesigning a layout for the Dutch buckets and replanting some of the Dutch buckets to maximize the space in my greenhouse. But first things first, let's have a look at the hardware store component DIY propagation racking. Okay, so this is the DIY propagation shelving with our store-bought LEDs, our panel lighting, our 1200 long panel lighting, and it has been performing tremendously. Now there are some intricacies that I'm going to share with moving the plants from an early stage like this, where you can see that they're just starting to pop, to the next stage where their first true leaves are starting to come out, to the point where you've got a really nice solid seedling that you can take and put into any hydroponic system or soil garden that you like. So what I've noticed is that the light reaching the seedlings at the shelf level is only adequate for the first week or two of growth, and then you need to raise the seedlings up to approximately 5 inches of height. Fortunately for me, the propagation dome lids are exactly that height, so all I do is I take the lid off the top and I slide the base onto the top of the lid of the propagation dome. Now obviously you can't do that with less solid lids, but you can just find something that will raise the height of these trays. Now these lights are well and truly enough to give you a really solid seedling. So these are definitely ready to be transplanted, and these 2 trays of seedlings will be the stock for a bunch of systems that I have planned to go out into the greenhouse. So these will be planted into the greenhouse probably over this weekend, but I'm extremely happy with how well this propagation lighting is working. You can see here that the light is not hot at all. It doesn't burn the seedlings, and the seedlings can actually butt up against the diffuser and not sustain any damage from over intensity of light or anything. This just allows you a little more time if life gets away from you and the seedlings reach the light. And because it's a panel light, the penetration through the canopy is maximized because it's reaching the leaves from every direction. So there's really not much evidence of any light deficiencies. And it means we can achieve some really healthy seedlings. So I'll just lift this tray. It is now at the right level for propagation, and we can head over to another video that I'm filming just behind the camera. Okay, so this is deep water culture versus crack key. This is very interesting because I actually had one of the viewers in the comments on my crack key video correct me as to why the leaves at the top were burning. And it wasn't because of the light intensity, it was because of a lack of airflow. And the lack of airflow caused calcium deficiencies because there wasn't enough transpiration or turgid pressure to pull the calcium up through the plant to the tips of the leaves, and the tips of the leaves suffered a calcium deficiency, which in turn caused necrosis of the tips of the leaves. So I'll show you what happened when I've actually added in this fan to this grow. Now, I'm probably going to have to redo this crack key versus DWC. I'll include it in the video. The results are a bit tragic. I had to use pyrethrum on these because there was an insect infestation at one point, as you can see with some of the leaves. But I'll get you a bit closer because this is super interesting. You can see the color difference between the internal leaves here and the external leaves. Now the external leaves I've treated with pyrethrum. You can see where the insects were attacking the external leaves, but that's not the reason that they're this different color. The line in the sand, The point at which I put the fan on is when these leaves started to produce through the center of the plant. So you can see the leaves are a lot healthier, and that is because of airflow within the environment, allowing all of the nutrients to be pulled up through the plant because of the raising of the transpiration rate due to the fan blowing across the leaves. Now that's actually something that I'd never thought would have such a great effect on the plants within an indoor system. All my outdoor plants, they get natural wind because of the shade cloth on the outside of my greenhouse. I don't have an impermeable greenhouse film. It's shade cloth, so the wind travels through the greenhouse and across the plants. So I've never ever had this necrosis of the tips of the leaves, such as this outdoors. And I've been struggling with it for years. I always thought that it was my fault due to the light, and to an extent it will be reduced by moving the light higher because there is less heat and the plant will actually be able to move nutrients at a more acceptable rate through its tissue. However, with the fan, this has actually allowed the growth to explode. So I've definitely underestimated the critical role that airflow plays within a plant's environment. So this is one thing I want to really highlight in this update, is that the Kratky video didn't address this, and both Kratky videos had the same problem with necrosis, and thanks to one of the viewers of Hoochos, I've now solved that problem, and you can see the solution in action. Okay, so moving outside, this is where my rain gutter grow system orchard used to be. I had a heap of different macadamias and citrus within a rain gutter grow system. Recently there was a storm which knocked them all over. Now the storm also knocked out the power for a couple of days, which killed most of my fully grown cos lettuce in my NFT. However, I was able to get backup power in time for the seedlings which were in there, because they obviously didn't require as much water and nutrients as the fully grown plants. But the storm did take a toll on a bunch of stuff that I'd been meaning to overhaul, including the citrus rain gutter grow system. Now the problem with the citrus, with the cocoa perlite in the pots, was that if the system ever stopped feeding into those pots, the pots would dry out completely, and because of the weight of the cocoa perlite, the plants would topple over because they were top heavy. With fruit and plant matter, they just fall over in the system, and I wanted to mitigate this by addressing it with a solution that I actually found within the dragon fruit hydroponic system. Now there is quite a lot happening here. There is some ginger and turmeric over on my right hand side, which we'll get to in a second. Behind me I've got the float box hydroponic system, and it has cucurbit seedlings in it, but what I want to focus on is the dragon fruit hydroponic system, because that is where I got the idea for revamping the citrus, which is off to my right. And that idea is right here in these pots. Now, when I built this system, I used a combination of scoria and cocoa. It was a 60-40 mix, 60 being the cocoa and 40 being the scoria. But it has given these dragon fruits a really sturdy base to work with. And as far as I can tell, it's acting exactly like perlite, aerating the cocoa so that the dragon fruits have oxygen to their roots when I water them. Now, I've been watering these dragon fruits with watering cans from the IBC reservoir behind me. Although I was at first going to implement a rain gutter grow system below these, which I've already set up when I built it, I actually have moved to the idea of just passively drain to waste watering them by hand. And these guys have proven really resilient in the periods where I've neglected them. And I put that down to the fact that they are a very resilient plant in general. But they have responded extremely well to hydroponic nutrient. I cannot recommend growing dragon fruit enough in this fashion. This is explosive growth. I've got a mate who deals with cactuses and he has seen my dragon fruit and he's extremely excited for me to collaborate with him on a hydroponic cactus video. But it is this technique that I wanted to emulate with citrus because of the weight of the scoria and the inherent properties of the cocoa scoria mix. I wanted to utilize it in the citrus system. So I decided to transplant all of my citrus from the original rain gutter grow system cocoa perlite mix over to this section here. Now, all I did was I removed the citrus, and you can see the citrus's roots. They were loving the hydroponic method, the hydroponic nutrient. However, I had neglected them. I hadn't maintained them properly. So I decided to cut most of the citrus right back and replant it into the same pots with a different mix. It's still got a lot of the perlite in it because I reused the cocoa perlite that I already had in those pots, but I mixed in an extra 40% of scoria so that now even when the pots are dry, they maintain the weight and won't become top heavy. So all I'm doing with these citrus, they are mostly potable citruses, so they don't need a ton of root space. I'm just watering them in by dunking a watering can straight into my hydroponic system reservoir, which feeds my float box system and the ginger and turmeric. And this is 2.4 EC, 6 pH hydroponic nutrient. And I have a video just here on how you can build a gravity feed reservoir like this. And then I just water it straight onto my potted citrus plants. And this is exactly the same as watering in a potted plant. It's just supplying the nutrient at the same time as you're supplying the water. I'll water in 5 liters and then move to the next and water in another 5 liters. And you can just use a moisture meter to figure out how often you need to water these plants in. And you don't need to worry about rain because cocoa has a high CEC, which is a high cation exchange capacity, which basically means that it will hold onto the nutrient until the plants want to utilize the nutrient and the roots extract it from the cocoa. So you don't need to stress about rain so much. Okay, so here we have a ginger and turmeric wick wedge hydroponic system. So we've got bagged cocoa, wick wedges underneath. Into that I've planted rhizomes of ginger and turmeric, and I actually did it right at the wrong time. I did it at the start of winter, which was silly, but at least it gave the ginger and turmeric some time to, I guess, acclimatize to the bag situation. They sprung in spring, and I've been really impressed with how the rain gutter grow systems have been supplying nutrients and water to the other ginger and turmeric, which I've had throughout the other rain gutter grow systems. And I wanted to see how much explosive growth we could get within bags that can stretch. Now, the problem I have been having is you can see here that sometimes when the shoots come through, they come through under the plastic and you can see them popping through, and you just need to sort of move the plastic back and then allow that shoot to come through because where you plant them isn't where they always shoot up. So I might actually have to cut the plastic away from these bags just so that I know that all of the shoots are allowed to come through. But as you can see here, we've got some really healthy plants coming through, and I'm extremely excited to give you the full video for this system. And this is a good example of what I mean by how well the turmeric is doing over in the other rain gutter grow systems. I didn't harvest this last season, and now that we've got a new burst of growth through spring, it's actually split the tub and is bursting out of its grow area because it is so productive. And this is turmeric. It's coming through really nicely, and have a look at that. It's just such a beautiful plant. But I'm hoping that will mitigate this problem with the bags, by the bags allowing the turmeric to stretch. And I'm really excited to see how much production we can get in that wick wedge bagged hydroponic system. Okay, so we're back in the greenhouse. I haven't completely gotten rid of the Beto bucket hydroponic system because I want to keep it around, because I've got a bunch of chilies in there that I would like to have in a Beto bucket system. It is super productive, so do not take my elimination of the system from my greenhouse as an indictment on the system. I think that it is well known to be a really fantastic system, and I don't think that I need to tell you guys that. I think that there is enough information on the internet to show you that these systems work fantastically. So I'm going to keep it around in this corner, but I didn't want it to take up so much space that it stifled my innovation for lack of room. So in order to utilize the space as best I could within the greenhouse, I decided to go with a 2-tiered Beto bucket layout. All this required was a plank laid over the top of some cinder blocks and a redesigning of the irrigation that feeds the Beto buckets and the piping that returns back to my Beto bucket reservoir. It's fairly simple. I've just got 13mm piping feeding into 4mm irrigation tubing. I will eventually have all of this feeding through the hooch halos, which are available on my Patreon. I then just planted out the jalapeno plants and the tomato plants that I had propagated in our DIY hardware store materials propagation shelving system, and they turned out really well. They are perfectly sized seedlings, and I'm really happy with how this system has turned out a couple of days after planting. And you can probably only just barely see the seedlings popping through out of the holes here. They are red pak choi, and I planted these out yesterday. I planted them out as early as possible, and you can see in some of these, the first true leaves just popping through. You can get these out as early as you like. This is a perfectly fine point to put them out, or you can leave it a bit longer if life gets in the way. Will you have a look at that flood and drain grow bed? Now this is oregano, thyme, basil, more thyme, and it has absolutely taken over what was meant to be an aquaponic system back in the day grow bed. And I'm not mad about it at all, because what it is doing is it is completely shielding the light from getting into that reservoir, and it is also creating a microclimate over the top of the reservoir. So what would be happening here is evaporative cooling from the transpiration of this green matter, causing a lowering of temperature above and around the edges of the reservoir. And what that is actually doing is it is keeping my nutrient solution cool over the summer months that are coming up right now. I obviously don't need this much oregano and thyme. However, I do need my reservoir cooled. So I'm going to be leaving this throughout the summer. I can even take clippings and give out clones to friends and family for their garden, and I can dry and enjoy my own fresh herbs if I like as well. This oregano has actually taken over like a weed. So if you do need something to cover your reservoir to keep the heat down, I can highly recommend this oregano, because let me just show you. This is just matted, and there is so much green material here, and it doesn't seem to be negatively affecting the pH or the EC too much. I'll be cutting it back as it starts to really outgrow, but I'm not seeing a massive change with the nutrient solution. And as usual, my NFT cos lettuce have been producing wonderfully. I've not gone wanting for either lettuce or tomatoes, which were supplied by all of the plants that I recently cleaned out to make all of this space that we will get to utilize over the coming weeks and months for some innovative new hydroponic system designs. All right, well, I hope you enjoyed this episode of Hoochos. Happy hydroponicking, and I'll see you next time on Hoochos.